The moment I saw the messages, my entire world shattered. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was undeniable proof staring me in the face. It all started a few weeks ago. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about my husband felt off. He was more distant than usual, glued to his phone, and often stepping out of the room to take calls he claimed were work-related. At first, I brushed it off. We've all had those moments where life gets busy and connections waver. But this felt different. It gnawed at me, a quiet, persistent doubt that I couldn't shake. One night, while he was asleep, I couldn't resist the urge any longer. His phone sat on the nightstand, lighting up with a notification. My heart raced as I reached for it. I hesitated, questioning if I was invading his privacy, but deep down, I knew I needed answers. What I found wasn't just a casual exchange or a misunderstanding. The messages were intimate. They told a story of a relationship far beyond friendship, one filled with secret plans, affectionate words, and promises meant for someone else. My chest tightened as I scrolled through their conversations. Her name was there, clear as day. As I pieced it together, the shock turned into a cold, sinking realization. I knew her. She wasn't a stranger. In fact, she was married, just like me. I could see her face in my mind, her life intertwined with someone else's. This wasn't just about my husband's betrayal, it was about two families being ripped apart. I sat there, paralyzed, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with my husband over the past few months. Suddenly, the late nights, the unexplained absences, and his guarded behavior all made sense. He wasn't distant because of stress or work. He was hiding something, hiding her. The weight of the discovery hit me all at once. My husband, the person I had built a life with, shared secrets with, and trusted implicitly, was living a double life. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and heartbroken all at once. But there was something else gnawing at me, her husband. Did he know? Was he just as oblivious as I had been? Did he have any idea what was happening behind his back? I imagined how he might feel if he ever found out, and the thought left me conflicted. I sat with this new, painful truth, unsure of what to do next. Confronting my husband felt inevitable, but the bigger question loomed, should I tell her husband too? Knowing who she was made it worse. It wasn't just a faceless stranger, it was someone I'd met, someone I'd spoken to, someone who had looked me in the eye. Her name was Samantha. She wasn't just any woman, she was someone I had crossed paths with before. The memory of her was painfully vivid. We had met at a neighborhood gathering about a year ago, introduced briefly as her husband stood beside her, smiling warmly. At the time, I hadn't thought much of her. She seemed polite, reserved, and entirely unremarkable. But now, I couldn't stop replaying every detail of our interactions. Had she been sizing me up even then? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Samantha wasn't just hurting me, she was betraying her own husband, a man who clearly adored her. I remembered seeing them together, their hands intertwined, laughing at some joke. I'd admired how close they seemed, how happy they appeared. It was all a lie. I decided to dig deeper. If I was going to confront this situation, I needed to understand it fully. I found her social media profiles, scouring through photos of her seemingly perfect life. There she was, smiling beside her husband, their family trips, their celebrations. It was all meticulously documented for the world to see. It made me sick to my stomach. But what stood out the most was the contrast between her online persona and the woman I now knew her to be. She wasn't just a bystander in this, she was an active participant. She had made a conscious choice to involve herself with my husband, knowing full well the destruction it could cause. I couldn't stop thinking about her husband. He was an innocent victim in this mess, just like me. I wondered if he had any inkling of what was going on, or if he was blissfully unaware. Part of me wanted to reach out to him, to tell him everything and let him decide how to handle it. But another part of me hesitated. Was it my place to destroy his world, even if it meant uncovering the truth? The emotions were overwhelming. I felt betrayed not only by my husband but by Samantha too, a woman who had no right to insert herself into our lives. Yet, as angry as I was, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling of guilt. Was I about to make this worse by involving her husband? Every time I thought about confronting her, I imagined the ripple effects. This wasn't just about me or my husband anymore, it was about 4 people whose lives would never be the same again. With each passing day, the weight of the secret grew heavier. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, not yet. I didn't want to involve friends or family until I knew exactly what I wanted to do. But the silence was suffocating. I felt trapped in my own mind, replaying the discovery over and over, questioning what had gone wrong and how we'd ended up here. And then, one day, I made a decision. I needed to see Samantha. Not to confront her, not yet, but to observe her, to see if she was as confident and composed as she appeared in her carefully curated photos. I wanted to understand the person who had played such a significant role in appending my life. So, I found myself driving past her house, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was hoping to see, but I couldn't help myself. And when I saw her, casually walking to her car, smiling at her phone, I felt a wave of anger and sadness all at once. She seemed so unaffected, so oblivious to the pain she had caused. It was in that moment I realized, this couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, someone had to take the first step. Someone had to face the truth. Driving to meet Samantha felt like heading straight into a storm. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to do it. There were too many unanswered questions, and I wasn't going to live with this uncertainty any longer. After weeks of internal conflict, I decided it was time to confront Samantha. Not over the phone, not through messages, face to face. I wasn't sure if it was anger driving me or the need for closure, but I couldn't carry the burden of silence any longer. I picked a neutral place, a quiet cafe far from her home or mine. I didn't want a scene, but I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. When I messaged her to meet, I kept it simple: we need to talk. You know what it's about. There was no room for excuses or ambiguity. To my surprise, she agreed almost immediately. Her response was quick and calm, as if she'd been expecting it. That made me uneasy. Did she feel no remorse? Did she think she could explain this away? The hours leading up to the meeting were torturous. I rehearsed conversations in my head, cycling through anger, sadness, and even a strange sense of dread. Would she deny it? Would she try to blame me? Or worse, act like it wasn't a big deal? When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked composed, almost too much so. It irritated me how unbothered she seemed, sipping her coffee like this was just another ordinary day. I hesitated for a moment, gathering myself, then walked over. I sat down without saying a word at first, letting the silence hang heavy between us. She broke it. I figured you'd reach out eventually, she said, her tone surprisingly calm. I couldn't believe her audacity. She spoke as if this was a casual misunderstanding, not the betrayal it truly was. I wasted no time. I know about you and my husband, I said, my voice steady but firm. And I need to hear it from you. Why? Why would you do this? For the first time, her expression faltered. She looked down at her coffee, avoiding my gaze. It was as though she'd rehearsed every possible response except one that required genuine accountability. Finally, she sighed. It wasn't supposed to get this far, she admitted. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. Her words felt hollow, like she was reading from a script. I pressed her. Do you even care about your husband? About what this has done to me, to my marriage? I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay composed. She hesitated again, then said something that stunned me. I do care. But sometimes, things just happen. Her answer felt like a slap in the face. It was such a weak justification for something so destructive. I couldn't hold back anymore. Things don't just happen, I said sharply. You made a choice. You chose to betray your husband. You chose to involve yourself with mine. And now, you're standing here acting like this was out of your control. Own it, Samantha. Own what you've done. My words seemed to land harder than I expected. She looked genuinely uncomfortable, fidgeting with her cup. But I wasn't finished. Do you know what it's like to wake up one day and realize your entire life is a lie? To find out the person you trusted most has been lying to your face? You've ruined my life, Samantha. And you're doing the same to your own husband. Does he even know? At the mention of her husband, she looked panicked. That was when I knew he was as clueless as I had been. He doesn't know, does he? I pressed. She shook her head, unable to meet my eyes. Her silence was answer enough. He deserves to know, I said firmly. He deserves the truth, just like I did. And if you won't tell him, I will. Her eyes widened in shock, but she didn't argue. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Please, she said quietly, give me a chance to fix this before you involve him. I'll end it, I swear. But her promises meant nothing to me. The damage was already done, and I wasn't sure if there was anything left to salvage. All I knew was that I had taken the first step. I had confronted her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a shred of control returning to my life. This isn't just about ending it, I told her as I stood to leave. It's about accountability. You can't keep pretending this never happened. It's time for the truth to come out. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of relief. The confrontation wasn't the end of this ordeal, but it was a start, and I knew the next step would be even harder. The decision to tell Samantha's husband weighed heavily on me. I knew it would shatter his world, just as mine had been. But deep down, I believed he deserved the truth. Living in ignorance, believing in a lie, wasn't fair to him or to anyone. After my confrontation with Samantha, I couldn't stop thinking about her husband. He was an innocent party in all of this, just like I had been. The image of him going about his life, unaware of what was happening behind his back, haunted me. I knew that if I were in his shoes, I would want to know. But the thought of delivering such devastating news was daunting. I wrestled with the decision for days, questioning whether it was my place to intervene. Was I just adding to the pain, or was this the right thing to do? Ultimately, I realized I wasn't responsible for the betrayal, Samantha was. Her actions had created this mess, and staying silent would only enable her to continue. I decided to approach him cautiously. I didn't want to ambush him, but I also couldn't let this drag on any longer. I found him on social media, his profile was public, and from what I saw, he seemed like a kind, hardworking man. Seeing pictures of him and Samantha together, smiling and happy, made my stomach churn. It reminded me too much of my own life before everything fell apart. After much deliberation, I sent him a message. I kept it straightforward. Hi, I know this might come as a shock, but I have something important to discuss with you about your wife. It's not an easy conversation, but I feel you deserve to know the truth. Please let me know if you're willing to talk. I didn't have to wait long for a response. He replied within an hour, asking if we could meet in person. His tone was polite but curious, as if he had no idea what I was about to tell him. We arranged to meet at a local park, a quiet, neutral place where we could talk without distractions. When the day came, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. This wasn't about revenge or spite, it was about honesty. As I approached him, I could see the confusion on his face. He was tall, with an air of quiet confidence, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that reminded me of myself not too long ago. After brief introductions, I got straight to the point. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, I began, but I believe you need to know the truth about your wife. She's been having an affair with my husband. His reaction was heartbreaking. At first, he looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language, struggling to process the words. Then, slowly, realization dawned on him. He didn't interrupt or argue, he just listened, his expression shifting from disbelief to devastation. I showed him the evidence I had gathered, the texts, the photos, everything that left no room for doubt. As he looked at the proof, his hands trembled slightly. He was silent for a long time, staring at the screen as if willing the images to disappear. I had no idea, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. She told me everything was fine. I trusted her. Hearing those words broke my heart all over again. I could see the pain and betrayal written all over his face, the same emotions I had been grappling with for weeks. "I'm so sorry," I said, feeling the weight of his suffering. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't let you live in the dark. You deserve to know the truth." He nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on the ground. "Thank you for telling me," he said after a long pause. "I wish I didn't have to hear it, but I'd rather know than be lied to." We talked for a while longer, sharing pieces of our respective stories. It was a strange, bittersweet connection, two strangers brought together by betrayal. By the end of the conversation, he expressed his gratitude, even though I knew his world had just been turned upside down. As I walked away, I felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't closure, not entirely, but it was a step forward. I had done what I believed was right, and now the truth was out. Samantha's husband deserved honesty, and I had given him that. What he chose to do next was up to him. But my journey wasn't over. I still had to face my own husband and decide what the future held for me. With the truth about Samantha's affair finally exposed, it was time to confront the one person I had been avoiding, my husband. There was no escaping the reality of what he had done. It was time for answers, and more importantly, it was time for closure. That evening, I sat waiting for him in the living room, the evidence spread neatly across the coffee table. My heart was racing, but I was determined to remain composed. When he walked through the door, his usual casual demeanor seemed to falter as he noticed the seriousness in my expression. "We need to talk," I said, gesturing for him to sit. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the evidence on the table, but eventually, he complied. "I didn't waste time. I know about you and Samantha," I began, my voice steady. "I've seen the messages, the calls, everything. There's no point in denying it." For a moment, he looked like he might try to lie, but then the weight of the situation seemed to settle over him. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a deep sigh. "I messed up," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Hearing those words didn't bring the relief I thought they might. Instead, it fueled a mixture of anger and sadness that had been simmering inside me for weeks. "You messed up?" I repeated, my tone sharper now. "You didn't just mess up. You broke our marriage, our trust, everything we built together." He tried to explain, stumbling over his words as he claimed it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that he still loved me. But the more he talked, the less I believed him. His excuses felt hollow, like he was grasping at straws to avoid taking full responsibility. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You didn't just betray me, you betrayed the vows we made, the life we shared. And for what? A fling with someone who's just as willing to hurt her husband as you were to hurt me?" He had no answer. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his silence speaking louder than any apology could. "I told her husband," I continued, watching his reaction closely. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "He knows everything now, just like I do. Samantha can't lie her way out of this any more than you can." For a moment, he looked panicked, but then the reality of the situation seemed to settle in. He knew there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. "So, what happens now?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, the words I had been rehearsing in my head finally coming out. "What happens now is that I'm done. I can't keep pretending like we can fix this, because I don't think I'll ever be able to trust you again. This marriage is over." The finality of my words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. He didn't argue or beg, he just nodded, his face a mixture of regret and resignation. "I hope you learn from this," I said as I stood up, my voice calm but firm. "Not just for your sake, but for the sake of anyone else who ever puts their trust in you." Packing my things and leaving wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of liberation. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the first step toward reclaiming my life. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I knew I had made the right choice. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to find peace, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Now, I look forward to what life holds for me. Never going back to my cheating husband. Only looking ahead to starting a new life. One with new chances, new people, new opportunities.